Let's start with this story that was uncovered by the Oversight Project at the Heritage Foundation. So, Joe Biden has signed a lot of things. He signed a lot of things when he was president of the United States, from executive orders to pieces of legislation to directives to memorandums. But the Oversight Project at Heritage analyzed the signature on every single piece of paper that they could get their hands on that Joe Biden had, at least ostensibly, put his signature on. And they found that on only one document was it Joe Biden's authentic signature. And wait till you hear what document that was that Joe Biden allegedly actually signed, because the story gets weirder. But before we get to that, let's talk about this device. An autopen is what it's called. You feed the piece of paper into it. I mean, think of it almost like you would if you were doing an automatic stapler. You feed the piece of paper into it, and a little machine writes the name. It copies it. In another, if it was used in a different way, it would be called a forgery. It forges Joe Biden's signature, and every single document analyzed by the Oversight Project found that this device, this autopen, forged Joe Biden's signatures. So my question is, I'm sure the same question that you have: who exactly was feeding those pieces of paper into the forgery device? Who was making that decision that an autopen should sign these documents versus Joe Biden? Did Joe Biden even know that a forged version of his signature was being used on all of these directives and memorandums and executive orders and pieces of legislation? Who was this? And then, of course, is this legal? Is this something that's permissible? Or are we facing a situation where there is a valid argument? And I would argue that there is a very strong argument that a document that was signed by an auto pen versus the president of the United States is not constitutional. It's not legitimate. It's not legal unless you happen to have a video of a president with some wild hypothetical scenario with a broken hand who you can see feeding the paper into the auto pen with the other hand. Something where you, as the citizen of the United States, are confident that the president had knowledge of that document and consented to it as chief executive by putting his signature somehow on that paper. But I don't feel that confidence when it comes to Joe Biden. Joe Biden has been in cognitive decline since before he was first elected in 2020. We noticed this in 2019, back when Jake Tapper told us that it was offensive to notice that Joe Biden was in cognitive decline, before Jake Tapper wrote a book talking about this massive cover-up the Democrats staged. Jake Tapper, of course, forgetting that he was part of that cover-up. I don't feel confident that Joe Biden knew what the auto pen was signing in his name. I don't feel confident that Joe Biden even knew who was feeding these documents to the auto pen. So I would like to request, maybe even respectfully demand from the United States Congress that they investigate this. Why don't we investigate who was operating the auto pen device, forging Joe Biden's signature on every single document except for one? Who was doing this? Was Ron Klain doing this? Did he have knowledge of this? What about Dr. Jill Biden? How many of these documents did she feed through the auto pen? Maybe Susan Rice knows something about this. There were many reports during the Biden administration that Hunter Biden was in a lot of meetings with Joe Biden, which is plausible because we know that Hunter Biden rode on Air Force Two with Joe Biden when Joe Biden was vice president. He rode on Air Force Two to China to secure a $1.5 billion equity deal. Right as Joe Biden as vice president, his stances on trade with China softened, just coincidentally. What does Hunter Biden know about this auto pen? What about Antony Blinken? What does he know about this? Or maybe we should be asking the man behind Joe Biden. Maybe we should be asking the actual puppet master. Maybe we should be asking what Barack Obama knows about this auto pen. Maybe we should be asking what John Podesta knows. I respectfully demand from Congress that they investigate this, because the only document that the Oversight Project could locate where it appears Joe Biden's real signature exists is on that very strange announcement that Joe Biden posted on X, of all places, announcing that he was withdrawing his nomination for Democrat, as incumbent for Democrat nominee for president of the United States, the day that Kamala Harris staged her coup against Joe Biden. Kamala Harris and Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And on that document, it appears, according to the Oversight Project, that Joe Biden's real signature exists. So why would that be? When we have reports that Joe Biden was coerced, even strong-armed into posting that. I mean, we know he doesn't know how to use X. We know he didn't actually post it himself. Did he even write it himself? Did he consent to it himself? Questions, I suspect the answer is no. But his real signature, that's the only document on which his real signature resides, and all on the rest, they were all fake. They were all fake. So who's behind it? Who knew about this? And is this legal? I would argue no. It's all fake. It's all fake. And the same this financial scandal that's happening with the Democrats' fundraising platform, as boring as that headline might sound, this is a scandal of epic proportions, and the implications of this, especially in future elections, and in the violence that the Democrats have been staging in the streets, cannot be understated. I mean, these allegations of money laundering from foreign countries, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So, this financial scandal that is currently unfolding could topple the Democrats' entire political infrastructure. And I do not exaggerate when I say that. So there is a platform online called ActBlue. You've probably heard of it. Although hopefully most of you have not actually used it, because it is a conduit for donations to Democrat causes. So if you, for example, wanted to donate to Nancy Pelosi, and who among you would want to do that? But if you were, bananas and insane and terrible and hated our country and wanted to donate to Nancy Pelosi, you would go to Nancy Pelosi's donation site, which is actually a page on the ActBlue website. So ActBlue is, you can think of it like GoFundMe, where any individual on GoFundMe can go and set up a fundraising campaign, and GoFundMe hosts the technology that allows people to donate to your cause. ActBlue is similar to that, but with political donations. So any Democrat politician can create a page on ActBlue, and that is the conduit through which they fundraise for their campaign. And it's not just for campaigns. It's not just for elected officials. You can use ActBlue if you were a Democrat cause. If you are a Democrat, if you are anything related to leftist ideology and you want money, you can create a page on ActBlue. Is essentially the summary of what ActBlue is. Okay, and we even have one, by the way. That in and of itself is obviously not scandalous. It's just technology, a website that someone built. And we have an equivalent on the right called WinRed. It's the same thing. It's a conduit through which Republican right-leaning politicians can solicit donations. It's a fundraising app in a sense. Now, the scandal begins to unfold because ActBlue, there's been a pattern of really suspicious behavior with some of the donations through ActBlue. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. After President Trump was targeted for assassination, after the assassin fired a bullet that hit President Trump's ear in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th, that day and the day after were the single highest grossing fundraising days in President Trump's, I believe, in the entirety of President Trump's campaigns, all of his political life, and rightly so. Because people on the right and people in the middle, sensible people in our country, wanted to support President Trump, because we do not assassinate our political enemies in the United States of America, period. And yet, that's what the left tried to do. So people were angry, they were outraged, they were fearful. Obviously, an event like that is of such enormity that it people want to do what they can to help. And for a lot of us, what we can do to help is we can donate. So compare that for a second with the day that Kamala Harris staged her coup against Joe Biden. The day that Kamala Harris staged her coup against Joe Biden, she received more campaign donations via ActBlue than Donald Trump did the day after his assassination. Now, weigh the probability of this with me for a moment. Does this seem realistic to you? Does this seem real to you? Do these two events, the intended murder of a president of the United States versus Kamala Harris, a politician that couldn't even get 3% of her own party to vote for her in the primary a couple of years earlier, becoming the Democratic nominee without a single Democrat voting for her, do those two things seem to you to be of equal implication? The answer to that is obviously no. And yet ActBlue collected more donations for Kamala Harris on that day than Donald Trump did the day after his assassination, which is an anomaly. It's something that we should note because it's weird. If something doesn't seem normal, oftentimes it isn't normal. Then, of course, it's not just that. It's not just, oh, something seems off. We have specific examples and reports of fraud that's happening on ActBlue. For example, last October, James O'Keefe reported that there is a senior citizen from Annapolis, Maryland, by the name of Cindy Now, who supposedly donated over 1,000 times to ActBlue in the year 2022, over almost $20,000, $18,849.77 in total. That is because she donated over 1,000 times. That's 3 donations every single day. Now, does that seem realistic to you for someone, especially a grandma, to donate 3 times every single day for an entire year. Well, it doesn't seem realistic. So when James O'Keefe and O'Keefe Media went to ask her about it, this is what Cindy No, this senior citizen from Annapolis, Maryland, said about these donations that she had supposedly made to ActBlue. Take a look at this.
FEC data shows that some senior citizens across the U.S. have been donating thousands of times per year. Some of these individuals' names and addresses are attached to over $200,000 in contributions. We went and knocked on a few of their doors to corroborate the data that we received. We're wondering if these donors are victims of what appears to be a money laundering scheme. Cindy No of Annapolis, Maryland, who in the year 2022 allegedly contributed over 1,000 times to ActBlue, totaling $18,849.77. That means Cindy would have had to donate 3 times a day, every day, for the whole year. My name's James O'Keefe, and we're doing a story on the number of people that have donated. You did donate to ActBlue, right?
Once in a while.
What about $18,850?
No, I don't think so.
You know people are using your address?
I don't think so.
I don't think so, she said. I mean, can you imagine the reality of that? Do you remember to do anything 3 times a day, every day for 365 days in a row? Of course you don't. I don't, because that's fraud. That's fraud. Now, ActBlue has actually admitted that they have had faulty algorithms or faulty defense mechanisms in their software. For example, up until a couple of months ago, when Congress began to look into this, you could make a donation on ActBlue with your credit card without putting the 3-digit CCV code in. So if you don't have the 3-digit security code that you have to put in, it's very easy to fraudulently use someone's credit card and make a donation. And ActBlue, when this was uncovered by congressional investigators, they quickly changed the back end of their platform. But when you have a platform as large as ActBlue, that's not a mistake. That's not something that was just an oversight. You can buy something. I online shop frequently. I don't like going in stores. There is not a single online merchant that I can think of that doesn't require you to put a 3-digit code in when you are putting your credit card in, making a purchase online, no matter how small of a purchase it might be. And yet ActBlue, which has supposedly received donations upwards of like $15 billion since 2008 or 2004, that this platform, it was a mistake that they don't ask for your 3-digit code. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. That is patently unbelievable to me. Patently unbelievable. And then, of course, we have reports that small money donations to ActBlue have evaporated after Elon Musk doged USAID and all that USAID money was cut. You'll remember that now we're at 83% of USAID programs have been cut since Elon Musk started his accountability project, the Department of Government Efficiency accountability project, looking into where the money at USAID was going. So the allegations there, and this is where the allegations of money laundering come in. The allegations there are that USAID was giving your taxpayer dollars to foreign countries. They admit to doing that. That's what their grants do. These foreign countries or individuals in these foreign countries were then turning your taxpayer money that they got through grants at USAID back into gift cards. And those gift cards were being used as donations to ActBlue, which is where the criminal allegations would come into play. And I highly encourage the Department of Justice to look into this. I think we all should raise our voices and ask the Attorney General to investigate this, because if those allegations bear any weight whatsoever, then we are now facing a situation where there are illegal foreign contributions to domestic United States political campaigns. That means foreign countries are funding Democrats if these allegations are true. That is a crime. That is illegal. And of course, we have in the past week alone, the past 2 weeks, 7 senior ActBlue officials, including their associate general counsel, the highest ranking legal official in their company, resigning. And Elon Musk is calling them out. As I said, circling back to the grassroots effort, or it isn't grassroots because it's not real. These protests, and they're violent. They're not peaceful protests. They're not nothing. These violent protests happening outside of Tesla showrooms. Elon Musk said that he has traced the protesters back to a handful of organizations that are funded through ActBlue. So not only are these protesters not grassroots, they're not authentic, they're not real, they're essentially paid actors, but this money is coming through ActBlue. And where's the money coming into ActBlue coming from? Well, we don't know because of this corruption. We don't know because there is evidence of fraud on ActBlue. So what's the implication of this? The implication of this is everything that we have seen in our country coming from the left, whether it is the Women's March, whether it is the violent Black Lives Matter riots that destroyed our cities across the country, whether it's Antifa and their so-called autonomous zones, whether it's climate protests, whether it is outside of the Department of Education, outside of Doge, outside of these violent protests, outside of Elon Musk's Tesla shows them it's not real. It's all fake. It's called astroturfing. It's intended to mentally manipulate you. It's exactly actually what US aid has done overseas in the past. It's political warfare because our perception of what's happening in the streets informs our perception of certain political issues because, like it or not, we like to think of ourselves as independent thinkers, but as human beings, we are communal animals. And we are impacted by what people around us think and by what people around us do. We all know this. We know this because in high school, we are warned about peer pressure. We know this because once we have children, we're encouraged to have a community of like-minded people around our children because it impacts how we as people behave. I mean, you can look at any kind of human behavior. If you're a married couple and you have friends who are divorced, you are more likely to get divorced yourself. Other people's behavior impacts your behavior. And so what we're seeing in the streets with these Democrat protests is an attempt to manipulate us, to change our perception of political issues, to change our minds, to control our minds. And it's fake. It's all fake. None of it's real. We're not learning from our neighbors. We're not taking part in communities that are standing up for their own interests. It's fake. It's Democrat politicians paying actors with potentially foreign money and definitely fraudulent money. And it's all coming tumbling down. It's all coming tumbling down. So think about the implications of this. We've talked about this briefly before. I've been surprised since the election that we haven't seen more violent protests. I predicted before November 5th that the Democrats would stage violent protests in the streets. And afterward, I thought it was eerie that there was such an absence of the violence that Democrats have become known for. Because 20 years ago, violent protests were dismissed as the fringe. They were condemned by both people on the left and people on the right. But in recent years, Democrats, including high-ranking Democrats, have embraced political violence. They've rebranded violence and called it justice, as they have rebranded our peaceful words and called them violence as well. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Their words, their violence is justice, and our words are violence. It's not real. It's all fake. And ActBlue is coming tumbling down. Tumbling down. The implications of this are going to be huge. We're not going to see the same kind of violence in the streets. And it's not just because of what we talked about previously, that the Democrats are demoralized, or that Kamala Harris, this is true, but it's only a contributing factor, that Kamala Harris drained the war chest, the DNC war chest. She spent so much money that DNC simply has no money left to pay protesters. That is true. And it's actually quite funny. But it's also because of what's happening at ActBlue. So what are Democrats going to do? What are campaigns going to look like in the future? What are these protests? We're already actually seeing it. Picture this is what Democrat protests are going to look like in the future. Al Green shaking his cane angrily at Donald Trump. That's the best that Democrats can do organically. That is their grassroots. That's what's real. A disgruntled, corrupt old congressman angrily shaking his cane. That's the real Democrats. Everything else was simply astroturfed, and it was as fake as Joe Biden's signature on all of those documents.